Chapter 2744. The Master of the Heavenly Law Di Fui tried many ways to help her, but none could completely purify the devil from within. To his dismay, the evil spirit became agitated by his actions and drove Gu Shijio even further into darkness. She was prone to anger and would kill anyone ruthlessly. Unfortunately, her cruelty had completely clouded her sense of judgment. In fact, the only thing she cared about was the child in her belly. Slowly, she started experiencing hallucinations and felt as though the entire world was going against her. Everyone was an enemy. One fine day, she even killed Gu Kanmo by accident. The severity of the problem had prompted Di Fui to talk to her about abortion. He told her to give up on the baby as they could always have more babies in the future. If she insisted on keeping the evil creature, the world would be doomed by a great calamity. Di Fui thought that removing the evil creature would set Gu Shijio back to her normal self. Never had he thought that the evil spirit was already deeply rooted in her soul. At that point, there was no way that he could set her free from the evil attachment. Helplessly, he watched as she turned more and more evil every day. Her evil self was completely illogical and unpredictable. She killed for fun and wreaked havoc at every chance, causing the people of the Starry Crescent Land to live in fear. The worst thing was that the evil spirit was contagious. Once Gu Shijio injured her victim, he or she would be driven by the same devil to become a ruthless killing machine. It was at this point that Di Fui finally recovered his power and memory as the master of the heavenly law. With this responsibility, he had to fulfill his duty without fear or favor. There were only two options for him. He could choose to kill Gu Shijio to completely destroy the devil and purify the world with good energy, or he could step down as the master of heavenly law, which would lead to his death as punishment by the heavenly law. In the latter scenario, Gu Shijio would still plague the world until the next master of heavenly law emerged and served her justice. Knowing Di Fui, he created a third option. He mastered the highest form of a forbidden spell, one that could remove the evil spirit that was firmly established in Gu Zijia's soul. All of Gu Zijia's power would be removed in the process, thus reverting her to her normal self. When Di Fui finally caught Gu Shijio, he had no choice but to severely injure her so that he could use the forbidden spell to get rid of the evil spirit in her body. The forbidden spell was a great torment as the entire process was carried out in burning flames, which was unbearable even for someone as tough as Gu Shijio. She screamed in agony for 3 days and 3 nights straight, until the whole rehabilitation was complete. Every trace of the evil spirit was finally removed. She turned out to be only an ordinary celestial being, which granted her immortality. On the negative side, she would not be able to practice or carry out any spell ever again. That was truly heart-wrenching for her to accept. In order to make up for her loss, Di Fui arranged a great banquet to celebrate their marriage. It appeared that the forbidden spell that Di Fui had created was an effective method to purify her, but it was associated with a high level of self-harm. In addition to his violation of the heavenly law, his power became greatly affected. The relative movement of the celestial bodies was greatly tied to the spiritual power of the master of heavenly law. Once his power was weakened, all the stars fell into a chaotic mess, thus messing the order of all 6 worlds. Things became worse when he became infected by the evil spirit from Gu Zijia's body. Part of the evil spirit remained in his body, but fortunately, it did not affect his behavior, only his recovery. To restore his spiritual power, he would take 100 years, instead of 10. Chapter 2745. The Master of the Heavenly Law, 2. In the end, he had no choice but to resort to isolation. He sealed himself off in a bleak and lifeless land to focus solely on his cultivation. At that point, his relationship with Gu Shijio was already at its worst. Gu Shijio would not talk to him about anything at all. When he told her that he was about to isolate himself, she remained nonchalant. "What does it have to do with me?" she icily asked. Her reply had completely thrown Di Fui off guard. He said nothing more and went straight into isolation. What he did not know was that Gu Shijio was already pregnant with their second baby, little Di Hao. Despite her hatred for Di Fui, she cherished the baby very much. She could always feel at ease whenever she thought of the baby. However, Her days in the residence of the Master of the Heavenly Law were not without difficulties. She was solely responsible for the Master of the Heavenly Law's punishment, for she had changed him from an emotionless man into a man in love. In addition to her violent past and the fact that Di Fui was injured because of her meant that none of the servants in her new residence treated her with respect. They would not even talk to her at all. As for the celestial beings from the 6 worlds, they all looked down on her, but never really mistreated her. At least, they had to show some respect to the Master of the Heavenly Law. Most of the time, they would stay away to avoid seeing her in person. Without any kung fu, her spiritual power was even worse than a young servant in the 9th heaven. Anyone could simply hold her down with a single strike. She was as good as a decorative container that was only for display purposes. Many people talked behind her back, saying that her incompetence made her no longer a match for the Master of the Heavenly Law. She knew about the nasty things that people said about her. However, she was not bothered. The only thing that truly hurt her was the loss of her power. Being remarkably persevering, she tried many ways to practice her kung fu, but her attempts were all defeated by the internal injuries of her nervous system. Every time she tried to practice, every inch of her veins ached with wrenching pain. In the end, she chose to give up all for the sake of her baby. Di Hao was a celestial baby, which made him unique. He had been in her womb for 3 years. She was almost convinced that the baby that she was carrying was highly abnormal and could even turn out to be a beast. Fortunately, some fetal movement in her belly reminded her that the baby was well and alive. For the past 3 years, Di Fui had never shown up at all. Hence, Gu Shijio felt forgotten. Although she never complained about it, deep down, she still cared. Apparently, Di Hao chose to come into the world at a bad time. Since Gu Shijio was alone most of the time, she often got bored. Hence, she would go out and travel every once in a while. When the contractions happened, she was caught in the wilderness. Extremely strong waves of pain immediately consumed her. She was all alone, and the pain she was experiencing made it impossible for her to get home. Therefore, she found a quiet place and thought about delivering the baby herself. Di Hao's strength as a celestial baby was not to be underestimated. It certainly made it very difficult for Gu Shijio. The entire labor lasted for 10 days, in a place that was cold and miserably isolated. Even when she was struggling with her labor, Di Fui never showed up at all. When she could no longer handle the pain alone, she finally cried his name out loud, hoping that Di Fui would hear her calling. Di Fui once told her that if she called his name out loud while wearing the love bracelet, he would be able to hear it. No matter where he was, he would surely make his way to her in not more than 2 hours. It had been more than 12 hours since her desperate call, but Di Fui was still nowhere to be seen. Understandably, she became unconscious the moment the baby was delivered. When she regained consciousness, she was still in the forest. Strong winds raved through the trees and numbed her body because of the intense cold. Understandably, Di Hao's birth was not properly handled, so the naked baby had been exposed to the cold for the past few hours. His signs of life were like a candle in the wind. Chapter 2746, The Master of the Heavenly Law 3. Gu Shijio struggled to carry the baby in her arms and was alarmed by his lack of vitals. Frantically, she tried to save the baby's life, but there was nothing that she could use to restore the health of an infant. She tried many ways, but the baby was still unresponsive. He was not even breathing at the time. She watched helplessly as the baby died in her arms. Alone, she sat in the snow with the dead baby in her arms for hours. The snow had covered her entire body in white by then. Soon, she passed out in the snow again due to the intense cold. When she woke up, Fan Qianshi was the first person she saw. In the predestined fate, Fan Qianshi's identity remained concealed. He was never exposed from the beginning. He stayed anonymous, even when the invasion of Blue Fox Planet happened in the Starry Crescent Land. There was no conflict between him and Di Fui, nor had they ever met. No one knew he was actually the man who plotted it all. Not even Di Fui or Gu Shijio was aware of him. Gu Shijio was distraught with anxiety the moment she woke up and could not find the baby. Fan Qianshi told her that the baby was already dead and cremated. The news had brought her nothing but misery. she became hollow from within, and soon, she became very ill. There was no reason for her to live on anymore, so she began to be suicidal. Nonetheless, Fan Qianshi refused to let her die. He was, without a doubt, capable of stopping her from taking her own life. As a start, she was placed under intensive surveillance 24 hours a day. You cannot stop me. You may be able to stop me now, but you cannot stop me forever, she firmly argued with the man. As long as she was determined to kill herself, she would eventually do it. After a long pause, Fan Qianshi told her that death should not be the only thing that she sought for. Without the baby, she still had her husband. As expected, Gu Shijio sneered at him. After all these years of disappointment, she had lost all hope in Di Fui, the almighty master of the heavenly law. If I could restore all of your kung fu and power, would you stop trying to kill yourself? Fan Qianshi offered, after putting in much thought into the offer. The idea finally quenched her suicidal thoughts. Hope returned to her. Fan Qianshi treated her very well. He managed to cure her wounds by using a set of secret techniques and restored all of her power like before. He even taught her new kung fu moves so that she could become even more powerful than before. They were together every day and night, so Fan Qianshi eventually fell for Gu Shijio, but the feelings were not mutual. One day, Gu Shijio found a magic mirror in Fan Qianshi's residence that would reflect the whereabouts of the viewer's loved one. Apparently, her hatred had not clouded her love for Di Fui. She still cared for him. Their loss of touch somehow worried her. Although the master of the heavenly law would not be easily harmed, she was still worried that something bad might have happened to him. Determined, she turned the mirror on and saw Di Fui on the screen. Di Fui was not in any danger, nor was he in isolation. He had yet to return to his residence. Instead, he was touring the celestial kingdom to make a comprehensive survey about the people's lives in each area. However, he was not alone. His companion was the goddess of war from the celestial kingdom. The way she looked at Di Fui was obviously full of respect, and the admiration was mutual. They looked like a happy couple as they walked through the splendor of the mountain scenery. It would seem that Di Fui was not interested in visiting his wife once he was done restoring his spiritual power. Instead, he chose to travel somewhere else. Chapter 2747. The Master of the Heavenly Law. 4. Di Fui had not contacted anyone from the Starry Crescent Land to inform them about his plans. It would appear that he could really go on living as though she never existed. The goddess of war started a conversation with him, involving details about his wife. However, Di Fui did not seem to care. He shook his head and answered with a smile, "There is nothing special about her. I have lived for millions of years. Love affairs mean almost nothing to me. She was only a woman I met when I was undergoing a catastrophe in the lower bound. We were madly in love back then, but now that I have returned to the course of the heavenly law, nothing about us matters anymore. She once carried our child, but the child turned evil in the end, so I had to destroy it. She was injured in the process, so I decided to take her back and give her a place to stay. My residence had space for her after all. Aren't you going to visit her? There is no point. My place is certain to remain safe and unthreatened. Without any kung fu, she will not be going anywhere. As long as she stays in my residence, she will be safe. I am reluctant to see her now. She is nothing but a decoration." Gu Shijio spat a mouthful of blood onto the mirror and shut it down. Even though she could no longer see Di Fui, she stood gazing at the magic mirror for a very long while. She could not stop thinking about how much of a joke she was to him. After all these years of perseverance, she became nothing but a piece of decoration to the man she loved. Finally, Gu Shijio agreed to marry Fan Qianshi. But in return, he must teach her the best kind of kung fu that he knew. She fully intended to become stronger than ever. Fan Qianshi swiftly agreed. He did not only teach her kung fu, but he had also even transferred some of his spiritual power to her so that she could experience a huge improvement in a short time. In order for Gu Shijio to remarry, she had to break the love bracelet that connected her with Di Fui. Shattering the bracelet would also mean that their future together would come to an end. Before, she had no strength to shatter the bracelet into pieces. Nonetheless, as long as she kept on practicing, she would be able to break the bracelet someday. When she finally did it, the evanescent love bracelet shone a few bright streaks of seven-colored light before disappearing entirely. Subsequently, she was no longer Di Fuyi's wife. Fan Qianshi started preparing for his wedding ceremony. It was certainly going to be a grand banquet, so the news spread throughout the world. Many of his friends and acquaintances attended the wedding, including Di Fuyi, the man who had not shown up in a long while. As soon as he arrived, he became so angry that he destroyed the entire ceremony. Even Fan Qianshi's residence collapsed into ruins. The first heaven almost fell apart on that day. Di Fuyi was so powerful that he managed to create an earthquake that shattered the entire building. Obviously, Fan Qianshi became furious at what Di Fuyi had done. After an exchange of words, the two celestial beings decided to settle things then and there. The fight was absolutely world-shaking, destroying many things. In the very end, Fan Qianshi was defeated, and Di Fuyi burned him to death by using the fire of Red Lotus. As for Di Fuyi, he was severely injured too. Gu Shijiao was a spectator during the fight and watched as Fan Qianshi died before her eyes. She was definitely enraged and became overwhelmed with resentment and hatred. Without much thought, she started attacking Di Fuyi. She summoned a sword and charged it with all of her power. It was the deadliest strike that she could launch at Di Fuyi. All this was to seek revenge for Fan Qianshi and herself. However, she had never really thought that the sword would really hit Di Fuyi. When she rushed aggressively towards him in the attack, he saw her coming, but never defended himself at all. The sword cut through his heart and nailed him to a wall. Naturally, no amount of weapons was able to hurt the master of the heavenly law. However, what Gu Shijiao used was a special technique that she had learned from Fan Qianshi, which was specifically tailored to killing the master of the heavenly law. As punishment for Di Fuyi's violation of the heavenly law, he was no longer clothed in an armor of proof. Gu Shijiao was his weakness, and also the only person who could ever truly kill him. Therefore, Gu Shijiao watched as Di Fuyi became immortalized under her sword and turned into faint streaks of light that wandered away. He wanted to explain himself, but never had the chance. Chapter 2748, The Master of the Heavenly Law 5. Before he disappeared completely, he managed to utter two last words, "Our child." Gu Shijiao became dumbstruck in the aftermath of his death. She slowly sank to the ground, trying to absorb and accept what had happened. Fan Qianshi and Di Fuyi both had many friends. Both parties found it unacceptable that the same woman had caused the death of two mighty beings, especially since no one knew the truth behind the feud. They only believed what they saw. The two powerful men were dead, all because of the same woman. They gathered around her and started judging her like an evil enchantress who would only bring death to whoever she came into contact with. Words of abuse and contempt filled the air. Some were cursing at her, others were crying at the loss of the men that they worshipped. Despite their harsh words, she remained unresponsive the entire time. In actuality, she could not even hear a word they said. Still trembling, she looked at her hands in remorse and started murmuring, as if talking to herself. "But why didn't you fight back?" She kept repeating her hoarse whisper. Every word was filled with deep regret and guilt. Her hands were still stained with Di Fuyi's blood. The strange thing was that instead of dripping away, his blood began to seep through her skin. All of a sudden, Gu Shijiao seemed to have emerged from her preoccupation. Her body started trembling violently. She took the sword in her hand and stood up abruptly as her power was so strong that her aura became instantly intimidating, pushing everyone away from her. Finally, they realized that the woman who they once thought was useless had become so powerful in an instant. She retained an unpleasantly overbearing aura that would make the people around her fall to their knees and surrender themselves to her. Panicked, they wanted to run, but their feet were too weak to move. Everyone in the crowd thought that it was the end. The woman would surely make them suffer. However, to their utter surprise, Gu Shijiao did not even bother to look at them. Looking pale and drawn, she stood in solitude and started performing a series of spells. Some informed ones could tell that she was performing a type of soul-calling spell, one that could summon dispersed souls, no matter how fragmented the deceased might be. After a long attempt, Not even a fragment of the person's soul who she was trying to rescue was collected. In despair, she finally stopped trying. She suddenly threw back her head and laughed out loud hysterically. To everyone's surprise, she used the same sword and pushed the sharp edge right across her own body. The gaping wound gushed out a crimson flood. "Di Fui, I am the one who killed you. Now I shall avenge you." It was her last message. Next, she used a spell that caused her body to explode into bits. That was the last image that Di Hao saw from the magic mirror. A mist of blood floating through the air. Aside from Gu Zijia's perspective, Di Hao was also able to see Di Fui's side of the story. From the screen, Di Hao could see that Di Fui had indeed gone into isolation, and the fact that he was in love greatly obstructed his recovery. He could not stop worrying about his wife, who was all alone. His lack of concentration had almost cost him his life. The time when Gu Shijio was struggling in labor was also the time when Di Fui was struggling in his practice. As a result of his erratic practice, he turned into a jade statue without any sign of life. All 5 senses of his were lost, so he never heard any of Gu Zijia's calls. However, the lifeless transformation was actually a blessing in disguise for the man. When he finally regained his consciousness, half of his spiritual power was already recovered. Relieved, he planned to rest up for a bit before leaving the place, but all of a sudden, the love bracelet on his wrist had shattered. Chapter 2749. The Master of the Heavenly Law, 6. Panicked, he could no longer stay still. He tried to see what happened, but his lack of focus had messed up his calculations. So, he left the place and returned to his residence immediately. From the servants, he found out that Gu Shijio was pregnant. He also learned that she had been missing for many days. They were still trying to locate her. He felt as if a thunderclap had gone off just above his head. Anxiously, he started making calculations about Gu Zijia's whereabouts. The more he analyzed, the paler his face became. Finally, he was able to track the exact place where Gu Shijio delivered the baby. In order to find out the baby's location, he began to perform a series of secret tracking spells. The baby was finally uncovered in a forbidden land that was very much out of sight. He made his way through the forbidden land and found Di Hao, who was placed in an ice coffin. Di Hao's tiny body was frozen into a little ice ball. He was not breathing and did not show any sign of life, but Di Fui noticed that the boy's soul had never truly left his body. Technically speaking, the boy was still alive. Apparently, he had inherited some of Di Fui's unique characteristics. In order to survive in times of great danger, Di Fui would turn into a jade statue. As for the boy, he would play dead and appear as a corpse. Upon examining the ice coffin more closely, Di Fui realized that there were traces of Fan Qianshi all over the place. Hence, Di Fui immediately knew that it was Fan Qianshi who froze his child in ice. Surprised, Di Fui used his power to melt away the ice so that he could transfer some of his spiritual power to the boy and revive him. The boy's exposure to the cold had significantly weakened his health. He could not even keep his eyes open. Without Di Fui's help, the boy would certainly never be able to wake up. While Di Fui was trying to save Di Hao, he also took the time to collect any clues around the ice coffin to understand the scenario better. He tried to picture the entire scene and imagined Fan Qianshi taking the baby in and sealing him away in the ice coffin. Before Fan Qianshi left, he had placed his hand on the coffin and said, "You have already obtained the rarest kind of celestial body even at such a tender age. What a miracle! I will freeze your body here for a while. Your blood and flesh can be of good use to me in alchemy. I can make a special pill out of your flesh, one that can make your mother fall irrevocably in love with me." Having retrieved Di Hao from the ice coffin, Di Fui then carried the baby away from the forbidden land. As soon as he escaped, the news about Fan Qianshi and Gu Zijia's wedding was already publicly announced. Nonetheless, he would not allow the wedding to happen, even if it meant spelling his death. However, the baby was too weak to be involved in the fight, so Di Fui set up a wizardry barrier around him before putting him in a cave. The cave was very well hidden, so there were hardly any signs of human activity around. In addition, there was a source of spiritual power in the cave, so the baby could absorb the very essence of heaven and earth to nurture his spiritual body. Before he left, he sealed off the cave with another wizardry barrier, so that no outsiders could enter and disrupt the baby. When everything was secure and done, he headed straight to Fan Qianxi's residence. At this point, Di Hao had already seen everything that he needed to know. He knew how his parents would eventually die. Every image was vividly played. Every conversation was clearly heard. However, he could not figure out what they were all thinking about when the incident unfolded. He never knew the true cause of his mother's great change in the end. However, he was sure that what she saw in the mirror was not true. Fan Qianxi must have twisted the facts and made her see something else. Di Hao became an orphan ever since he was only a baby, so he never got to know his parents in person. However, he believed that his mother would not kill Di Fui. Some sort of spell must have been controlling her until Di Fui's blood disarmed the limits to her power, possibly enabling her to take back control of herself. However, when she finally regained her consciousness, the mistake had already been made. There was no way she could amend it. Chapter 2750, The Master of the Heavenly Law, 7. Di Hao became the next Master of the Heavenly Law. He finally learned about the responsibilities and realized how rebellious his father had been to keep his family safe. Nonetheless, he did not succeed. It seemed that their love was destined to end with heartbreak. Having grown and gained enormous power, he used a secret technique to find out about Fan Qianxi's history, which was the first time he really learned about the man's identity and his intention behind the plot. Initially, Di Hao believed that Fan Qianxi wanted to be with Gu Shijio, and that was the start of how all three of their lives came to an end. However, after knowing more about Fan Qianxi, it appeared that the only thing that he truly wanted was to become the master of the heavenly law. However, his lack of capability obstructed him from competing with Di Fui. Thus, he had to play dirty. Gu Shijio was only his tool, as she was the only one who could kill Di Fui. Many plans were set in place in this elaborate plot, and things slowly evolved to the point that he desired. Everything worked out well for him. He did not even need to expose himself or his true intention. The only thing that did not happen according to his plan was his death. He never thought that he would die in the hands of Di Fui first. In the very end, all was lost for Fan Qianxi. He achieved nothing from all his troubles. The yellow candlelight was diffused in the dark. There he sat, reminiscing about what happened to his parents. He could not help but heave a deep sigh of relief, for the venom in Lan Wei's body was the key that led to his parents' tragic death. Without the venom, his sister, Di Shuyue, would not have died before she was born. His mother would not have suffered under the control of the evil spirit placed in her by Fan Qianxi. Di Hao managed to change many things after traveling through time by accident. For example, Fan Qianxi's identity was already exposed at such an early stage. Furthermore, the primary and secondary venom had not taken shape to cause any harm. Even his father had regained his memory as Di Fui in advance and was no longer the innocent little Nianma of the past. Finally, his parents had completely talked themselves out of their misunderstandings. Although his mother once had contact with Lan Weihu and was affected by the evil aura, it was nothing serious. The evil aura was not enough to cause any harm to her body. The baby was still Di Shuyue, not some evil being. With half of the flood dragon's heart in his possession, everything was going to turn out well. Di Hao looked at his little hand in faint lights and started giggling. He was glad that his limited body size had not hindered his capability. He thought to himself that what he had accomplished was rather impressive. With that in mind, he rolled around comfortably in the sheets. However, another question struck him. If the course of history were to be changed completely, his parents would still be alive, so his father would remain as the master of the heavenly law. Perhaps he would not need to take on the responsibility and could be free to pursue whatever he wanted. It was the kind of future that he looked forward to. Just keep going, he thought to himself. When Di Hao was busy celebrating his milestone, Di Fui finally found the hidden devil in Gu Zijia's body. The devil was very well hidden by masking its evil power with Gu Zijia's spiritual aura. Also, Its evil power had significantly been toned down to become as natural as her spiritual aura, so no one would realize its existence. The only noticeable difference was Gu Zijia's change of mood, but the symptom could easily be misread as part of pregnancy. Fortunately, the devil was still weak. In order for it to grow, it needed to absorb more energy from a strong man. Its need for a male had triggered Gu Zijia's sexual cravings. The two lovebirds had always been passionate about one another. Only this time, Gu Shijio was the desperate one. Di Fui was happy and baffled at the same time by his wife's sudden change. What surprised him was the decrease in his spiritual power every time they had sex. Anyone would easily overlook the slight decline, but not Di Fui. Being an acute observer, he noticed the difference the third time they had sex. When they were nearing the climax of their lovemaking, Di Fui purposely observed the condition of her body and finally caught a slight movement of the evil being. The devil was quietly absorbing his yang energy from his body. The thing seemed to be already alive. It seemed to have noticed Di Fui's suspicion, so it immediately withdrew itself to avoid being discovered. Chapter 2751. Luring the evil spirit. Di Fui quietly checked her body but could not find it. "What's wrong?" Gu Shijio asked with her eyes locked on him. Gu Shijio had been undergoing a phase of insecurity, so she was sensitive like a kitten. She could easily notice when Di Fui did not seem right. Di Fui smiled and dragged her back down on the bed again. "Nothing, I am just afraid of hurting the baby, so I wanted to check that it was all right." The man had to be cautious as it was possible that the evil spirit could hear his conversation with her. To be safe, he could not mention the matter to her right now. He had to try to expel the evil energy from her body quietly. After lying down for some time, Gu Shijio fell asleep in his arms. On the other hand, Di Fui could not fall asleep. He simply looked at the woman in his arms and wondered about the origin of this evil energy. If he were not mistaken, this evil energy was related to the mother-child Venom. It seemed that she was somehow contaminated. However, he had to lock down its position before making a plan. Naturally, he needed to have sex again in order to do so. Therefore, after Gu Shijio woke up, she found that Di Fui was looking at her naughtily. After all, they were husband and wife who had been doing this for a long time. By just looking at him, she immediately knew what he wanted to do. She could not help but wonder how hungry the man was for sex. It was not that long ago since they last had it. Nonetheless, she would not turn him down. This time, Di Fui did not get any results from their lovemaking session. The evil energy was missing. Di Fui sneered in his heart. Did the evil spirit think that it could fight against him? Or perhaps, it already had its fill for now. Since this evil energy needed its yang qi, Di Fui thought that it would dry it out for 2 days. Di Fui wanted to withhold its energy from being consumed by the evil energy, but he did not intend to hold back from satisfying his wife. She would certainly get suspicious. Therefore, Di Fui told Gu Shijio that he would like to practice a particular skill which was useful for dealing with fan qianshi. Gu Shijio naturally agreed to that as she believed that fan qianshi was a major threat to the universe and them. 2 days were not long, but for Gu Shijio, it was somehow a bit difficult. She was not in the mood to do anything and did not feel very energetic at all. She always thought about him uncontrollably. She never thought that such a short separation would make her suffer so much. It almost felt like she was facing withdrawal symptoms from cigarette addiction. She was restless, and she finally realized that something was not right. Her temperament had always been free and easy. When did she become so small-hearted? She could not even control her emotions and felt as if some other soul possessed her. She subconsciously checked her body but found nothing. What could explain her sudden change in behavior? Gu Shijio knocked on her own forehead a few times against a wall as she simply could not figure it out. When she was feeling dizzy, the directed audio spell on her waist suddenly lit up. She was somewhat irritated and picked up hastily, "Who is it?" She sounded a bit rude. The caller on the other side snorted. A child's voice sounded, "Mother? How air?" Gu Shijio sighed, and her voice softened after that. "How air, you are okay? Where are you?" "Mother, I hunted something precious. Wait for me to go back and pass it to you." Did something happen to you? You sounded rather annoyed earlier. Did you quarrel with father? This kid was always very sensitive, so it was so easy for him to detect her change of emotions. Gu Shijio took a deep breath and felt apologetic. Chapter 2752, Luring the Evil Spirit 2. This kid was so young. She should be the one who was concerned about him. However, it was always her son who cared about her. Perhaps she was really incompetent as a mother. No, baby. I am all right. What about father? He is isolating himself to practice some new skill, but he will come back soon. She chatted a bit with her son through the directed audio spell but suddenly heard some noise from the other side as if many monsters were screaming. What happened? Did her son go to a monster's nest? Hao cursed in his heart before quickly saying to his mother, "Mother, I will talk to you again when I am back. Let me settle them first." Hao was so frustrated. After he retrieved half of the heart of the flood dragon, he tried to rush back, but he did not expect so many passing monsters to be attracted to it because of its richness in spiritual power. When he was holding it, it felt like grasping the meat of Monk Tang in the story of Journey to the West. Along the way, he had been attacked by at least 17 or 18 monsters. Even strange birds had rushed toward him from above. At that point, there were colorful lights condensed in his palm. Simultaneously, he had a murderous look on his face indicating that he was ready to kill anything and anyone that stood in his way. Had these creatures and monsters overlooked his abilities because he was a kid? He wanted to give them a lesson that they would never forget. When the directed audio spell was hung up, Gu Shijio was stunned for a moment. She was already at the level of great deity, so she had encountered countless monsters in her life. Therefore, she no longer feared the sound of roaring creatures. However, this time, when she heard the monsters coming after her son, her heart suddenly shook, and her stomach suddenly growled. She had an inexplicable desire to rush over to him and catch a few fierce beasts to eat. Was this something that pregnant women would normally face? It was normal for them to crave certain things and feel uneasy if they were not satisfied. All of a sudden, Gu Shijio felt very warm at home, and her throat was parched. She quickly went out as she wanted to take in some fresh air. There was a big lake in the Biwu Palace that was rich in spiritual power as well as aquatic animals. There were certainly countless rare and delicious fish inside the pond. Gu Shijio stood on the bridge over the lake for a moment. She then leaned over to watch the fish under the bridge. It used to be a pleasant and calming sight for her, but now she only felt hungry. She tried to suppress the desire but failed, so she just jumped into the lake. Mu Feng and the gang had been secretly watching her, and they were so shocked to see what she just did. The lake was definitely cold and not suitable for swimming. To make matters worse, Gu Shijio was pregnant. Mu Feng almost jumped in as well, but all of a sudden he quickly retreated. In the lake, Gu Shijio had already taken off her clothes and only floated on the surface of the water with her innerwear holding 2 large crabs with claws in her hands. The big crabs were 8 times the size of a typical river crab. They were like 2 small round tables struggling in Gu Zijia's hands. Unfortunately, Gu Shijio was not very careful, so her hand was hurt by their claws, and her fingers bled. She originally wanted to bring the crabs up on shore and get someone to steam it for her. Nonetheless, after being hurt by the crab, she was so angry that she pulled off the crab's claws in anger. Gu Shijio looked at the tender red flesh inside the claw and could not control herself anymore. She wanted to suck on the crab at once. Shijio! Gu Shijio was stunned when someone called her from the shore. A figure appeared next to her. Gu Shijio looked up and saw Di Fui in purple clothes. She was happy and rushed to him. Fui, you finally came out of isolation. Chapter 2753, Luring the Evil Spirit, 3. Gu Shijio was still holding the giant crabs in her hand, so when she rushed out from the depths of the lake, the big claws on one of the crabs almost poked Di Fui's face. Swiftly, Di Fui waved his sleeves, and the 2 crabs suddenly appeared on the shore. While he reached for her hand and pulled her out, he used some spiritual power to dry her hair and clothes. Do you feel like eating crabs? I can cook it for you. Let's go back first. He then took her back into the residence. D. Fui's cooking had improved significantly of late. He cooked the 2 big crabs personally and added some rare spices to the crab meat before asking her to eat them slowly. The crab meat was cold in nature and not suitable for pregnant women. However, the special spices somehow neutralized the meat so that it would not harm her if she had some. To be honest, the crab cooked by D. Fui was very delicious, but Gu Shijio had no appetite after eating 2 mouthfuls. It seemed that she would prefer to have raw meat instead, just like before, when she had ripped off one of the claws of the crabs she captured. When she realized this, she was shocked. She suddenly remembered Lan Weihe's case and recalled that Yen Chen used to say that after the venom had infected Lan Weihe, she was also very thirsty for meat. Could it be that she had a child venom fetus in her belly? The thought shocked her, and the piece of crab in her hand fell to the ground. What's wrong? D. Fui held her hand and asked. Gu Zijia's face was a little bit pale. Am I pregnant with a child venom fetus? The baby in my stomach? The thought of it was too scary that she did not dare not say it out loud. D. Fui grabbed her waist. Why would you say so? My dear, you have overthought. It cannot hide from me if it is a child venom fetus. Your baby is well, and there is nothing wrong. Gu Shijio was slightly relieved but was not fully at ease. I feel that something is wrong. She then explained her realizations from the past few days. D. Fui listened to her and let her finish. Then he smiled and said, I have asked for advice from a few midwives. It is normal for a pregnant lady to have a variety of strange reactions. Everything that you have mentioned so far is normal. Don't overthink it. But why do I crave for you as though I am craving for a cigarette? Well, that proves that we are really in love, and we can't live without each other. Baby, I am very pleased. D. Fui smiled and pulled her in his arms. Speedily, he then kissed on her lips. Gu Shijio pushed him away. You are not taking this seriously. Her eyebrows furrowed in frustration. She could not explain why she absolutely missed the man when he was away but felt normal again when he was back by her side. She snuggled in his arms and looked at his handsome face. All of a sudden, she seemed to slobber and wanted to eat him. She felt like she had become a female wolf. Fortunately, this was her husband. She could eat him whenever she wanted to. Gu Shijio raised her hand and wrapped it around his neck. Then she sat on his lap and playfully bit his ear. Seconds later, she exhaled a warm breath into his ear and said softly, Celestial Master Zhua, do you want me? Based on her body language and actions, it was completely believable that she would choose to rape him if he did not comply. Stupid! Of course I want you. You're my wife. Come on, eat some crab meat. I am hungry. This crab foot is mine. After scooping the crab meat for her, he started to lick it. Was he serious? Gu Shijio was rendered speechless by his response to her advances. Chapter 2754, Luring the Evil Spirit, 4. Since D. Fui was enjoying the crab, she did not want to interrupt him and decided to practice patience. He left for 2 days and he didn't even miss me. Is he getting tired of me? When she suddenly came up with this thought, she was shocked. When did she become so desperate? She was even more desperate than a housewife. Although she knew that she was overthinking, she found that she could not control her feelings and emotions. Nonetheless, Gu Shijio did not want to look like a fool, so she decided to suppress the negative thoughts. After some time, it seemed that D. Fui genuinely did not miss her. He was chatting with her about everything under the sun but never mentioned to bring her back to the bedroom. Gu Shijio became more and more anxious, and finally, she could not help it. She rushed to him and pulled his robes. She almost drooled as she shouted, Fui, I want you. Immediately, D. Fui was speechless. He raised his hand and held her little paw that was burning. Okay, let's go back to the bedroom. It was unsatisfying sex for Gu Shijio. There was no other way to say it. D. Fui was particularly bad today. He seemed to be deliberately torturing her. Every time it reached a critical time on the bed, he would turn off the fire. As she was not satisfied, she almost turned violent. But just at that moment, Herbali was suddenly in pain. She could not help but moan as she took a deep breath and curved her body. What are you doing? Di Fui worked so hard that the evil energy finally reappeared. He took the chance and wanted to expel it out of her body entirely. However, he did not think that Gu Shijio would suffer from such agonizing pain before he could do it. Perhaps, the evil spirit could not be separated from her body. It seemed to have rooted itself in her soul. Because of his failed attempt to lure it out, the evil spirit quickly hid again and did not re-emerge. Gu Shijio finally got the satisfaction she longed for and fell asleep. Meanwhile, Di Fui's heart was sinking as he lay next to her on the bed. This evil energy in her body was more difficult to deal with than the child Venom fetus in Lan Wei's body. That child Venom fetus could be easily removed using his spiritual power, but the one in Gu Zijia's body was like a hedgehog, and he had no idea how to take it out. Furthermore, this evil energy seemed to be attached to her womb. Once it was pulled, it could cause pain in her abdomen, and would even hurt her unborn fetus. For the moment, Di Fui did not dare to do anything. However, he could not let this go on for too long as the evil energy in her body would be growing stronger and stronger. It was only a matter of time before it would take control of her mind and body. But what should he do? His fingers stroked her delicate face, and his eyes fell on her abdomen. This baby was very precious to her, and he knew it. Of course, he cared about the baby as well and wanted it to be healthy. Nonetheless, if he had to, he would abort the baby to save Gu Shijio. Was Shuyue destined to be aborted? 2 days later, Di Fui had used all the ways he knew to expel the evil spirit, but it seemed to have been deeply rooted in Gu Zijia's body. Now and then, Di Fui would even notice a red light in Gu Zijia's eyes. Perhaps, the evil spirit was using her eyes to observe its surroundings. Di Fui knew that it was time to make a decision. Otherwise, it was going to be too late. To try to start the conversation, he thought that it would be suitable to bring her out for a walk. The sunshine in the garden was just right, so Di Fui decided to bring her to the garden. Fui, is something troubling you? Gu Shijio was still very sensitive to him. Di Fui looked down slightly when he heard her question. He took a deep breath and sighed. Shijio, this baby. He wanted to tell her that the baby needed to be aborted, but before he could do so, there was noise from outside the residence, and a small figure rushed in hastily. Father, Mother, I'm back. It was a little Di Hao. He looked somewhat disheveled, his little robes were not tied properly, and one of his boots was missing. However, his pair of bright eyes still greeted them with faint excitement. Mother, I have brought you a big gift. You will be very pleased with it. Chapter 2755. It felt its shell was somewhat cold. There was a white jade plate on a white jade table with a big piece of meat. The meat was about the size of a small round table, and looked like half of a heart that was still bright red in color. It was still pulsating rhythmically when they laid eyes on it. Gu Shijio looked at the bloody meat and then looked at her son's dirty face. How this is? The heart of a flood dragon. Mom, do you like it? Di Hao looked up at her and waited for praise. I like. Gu Shijio never expected this to be the so-called big gift from her son. Of course, she did not dislike it. After all, her son was so young and still brought a gift back for her. She was delighted but just did not expect the kid to bring back such a strange item. He actually took out the heart of a creature. Gu Shijio had seen a lot of dragons in the course of her existence, and many died by her hand. Nonetheless, she only heard a dragon's heart could improve one's spiritual power. Was it so tasty to consume? Had her son brought it back for her to cook? Anyway, since it was brought back by her son, she would surely entertain his request. Therefore, she pulled up her sleeves and was ready to cook it. This probably came from a large dragon, right? It was excellent that you could hunt it down. So, how do you want to eat it? I think it can be made into more than a dozen types of dishes. Di Hao remained silent. Something smells so good. What is so fragrant? The Muscle and Lu Wu rushed over from a distance. When they saw the big heart on the table, they squinted at it. It is such a huge heart. It looks so juicy and tender. Master, you can certainly bake a lot of skewers with such a big heart. Master, let's grill it. It must taste very nice. I think roasting the muscle would also be very delicious. Di Hao smiled slightly and circled around the muscle. Its meat is tender. Other than roasting, we can also cook another pot of soup. The muscle was speechless. It felt that the clamshell suddenly turned cold. It shrunk and weakly said, "I am too old. My meat is also very, very old." How old are you? The muscle straightened its chest to reply, "More than 10,000 years old." Well, you are just over 10,000 years old. As compared to the 100,000-year-old flood dragon, your meat is still considered tender. What's more, the meat of a muscle is always tender. Since you have been practicing for so long, I bet your meat must be extra nutritious. While walking around it, Di Hao stared at the muscle as if it was his next meal. The muscle wanted to cry in fear. It pitifully said, "Master, I have to practice. I need to leave first." It pulled Lu Wu and ran away immediately. The little guy was too ferocious. The muscle only wanted a small piece of meat from the large heart, but apparently, the boy wanted to trade that meat for its entire body. Gu Shijio was surprised. "How, did you say that the owner of this dragon heart is 100,000 years old?" "Well, it is 100,000 years old exactly, and it is still a white dragon that has never killed anyone while practicing its immortality." Gu Shijio was stunned. Was it turning into a dragon? Di Fui suddenly asked. Yes, when I went, it had already turned to be 3/4 of a dragon. It almost ascended. Gu Shijio was speechless again. She felt a little sympathetic to the flood dragon. It was not easy to practice for so many years. Furthermore, it had to refrain from killing as well. A flood dragon's nature was typically savage and cruel. Most of them had dark practices. It was really rare to encounter such a pure breed. Nonetheless, it was unfortunate for the dragon that it had to meet her son. Chapter 2756. He liked the feeling of having a family. However, there are things that a gentleman should and shouldn't do. If it is an evil dragon, you kill it for the people. However, it was not right for you to kill this dragon. Gu Shijio thought that she had to educate her kid to be kind, and perhaps, to be less ferocious. After all, his father was the master of the heavenly law. "Mother, I did not kill it. I took only half of its heart and gave it an elixir to expedite its recovery. Although it failed to ascend this time, it only needs another 5,000 years to have the chance again." Gu Shijio breathed a sigh of relief but still felt that it was inappropriate for him to do so. She still felt the need to correct him. "It is not easy to practice. And you did all this just to satisfy a craving?" She scanned Di Hao again just to check if he had any hidden reason for doing so. She pulled him over and checked his pulse. "Did the dragon injure you?" There was no doubt that Gu Shijio was a skilled physician. Just by checking his pulse, she could immediately tell that something was not right with her son. She frowned and commented, "However, your spiritual power seems to have been exhausted. Moreover, there are internal injuries in several of your veins. Honestly, I would have preferred you not to give me this gift and to take better care of your health." "You are right. I won't do it anymore." Di Hao obediently leaned his head in her arms. Feeling his mother's love for him was truly an amazing experience. Even though she was nagging at him, it was so much better than being alone and unloved. Di Fui looked at his well-behaved son and raised his hand to pull him over. He used a cleaning spell on him and straightened the boy out in a flash. "Di Hao, remember one sentence. As a man, you need to be responsible for everything. You have to keep your clothes clean and tidy. Also, try not to let your family worry about you." One could easily feel worried for him just by looking at his attire. Then, Di Fui took out a pair of shoes from his storage space and threw them beside Di Hao's feet. "Try it." Di Hao's eyes lit up as he placed his little feet into the shoes. The size seemed to be perfect. Obviously, this was what Di Fui prepared for him. For once, Di Hao managed to feel what it was like to have parents that loved him. Di Hao was satisfied, and felt that all of his labor had paid off. He liked the feeling of having a family. Once he could tell that the boy was all right, Di Fui shifted his attention back to the heart that was lying on the table. Even though he did not have the memory and knowledge of the Master of the Heavenly Law, he still sensed the unusualness of this heart that belonged to a flood dragon. There seemed to be a purity to it that was uncanny. After that, he turned his attention back to Gu Shijio. At this moment, she seemed calm and free. Although she was also curious about the heart that was in front of her, her temperament seemed to have returned to normal. Had this heart somehow managed to purify her? Di Fuyi's heartbeat quickened as he pondered on the outcome. He looked at his son again and realized that his son would not hunt for the dragon's heart for no reason. Could it be that? Di Hao was also looking at him. When their eyes met, Di Hao blinked at him to confirm the correctness of his thoughts. All this was communicated without a single word being uttered. Di Fui quietly pulled Gu Shijio to his side and wanted her to sit on his lap. However, Gu Shijio snuck her way out of his embrace. She did not want to be too physical in front of her kid. Her actions stirred his heart again as he recalled how clingy she had been over the past few days. Then, Di Fui reached out his fingers and touched the heart that was on the table. He seemed to feel something and smirked. Gu Shijio wondered what he felt at that moment. She looked at his face and then looked back at the dragon's heart and asked, "What is inside this heart?" Chapter 2757. Trust him. They had actually. Di Fui seemed to have been caught off guard by Gu Zijia's question as he was distracted by the dragon's heart. He found Gu Zijia's curiosity almost overwhelming at this critical point. Gu Zijia's curiosity was not unjustified. In fact, ever since she laid eyes on this treasure, she seemed to have been subconsciously more alert. A voice seemed to warn her to keep her distance from it. Therefore, although she found it intriguing, she was also rather cautious about getting too close. Nonetheless, seeing how Di Fui had reacted to it had pushed her curiosity across the line. She took a few steps closer to it and asked, "What's it inside?" Why don't you personally touch it? It is shocking." Gu Shijio was still hesitant to come over. "It is just half of a dragon's heart. What is so shocking about it? Baby, this is not an ordinary dragon's heart. I remember that you talked about the journey to the west, saying that Monk Tang was a good man who had 10 years of practice. He was the reincarnation of a golden monk, right? Therefore, by just eating one piece of his meat, one can be immortal. This dragon had practiced for 100,000 years. Its meat was more magical than the meat of Monk Tang. By just touching it like this." Di Fuyi's sudden change of expression showed that he was very surprised when he touched it. Di Fui had seen countless treasures before. There was almost nothing that could make him have such an expression today. Hence, Gu Shijio's curiosity had inflated all the way up. Given that she knew that Di Fui would not harm her, she went over and put her finger onto it. The heart was slightly warm, which was the first feeling that she sensed upon touching it. She did not feel anything special, except for the fact that she was inexplicably nervous. Subconsciously, she wanted to retract her hand, but Di Fui grasped her. "Come on. To feel the effect, press in this way and use the purification technique I taught you before. You will feel its difference." He separated her 5 fingers and placed them in the 5 veins of the heart. Meanwhile, Gu Shijio followed his instructions and used the purification technique that she learned from him. Pump, pump, pump. Her heart suddenly jumped fiercely. She felt a hot stream of energy rushing into her body through her 5 fingers. Its first destination was straight into her limbs, followed by her tight belly. This sudden rush of energy triggered something in her belly and made her feel as if something was unwilling to leave. All of a sudden, she could feel it pulling on her stomach. Naturally, Gu Zijia's first instinct was to worry about her baby. She was afraid of losing her daughter, so she wanted to withdraw her hand and stop the entire process. As she lifted her hand, Gu Shijio could feel that the pain in her belly immediately stopped. It was a relief to her. "Shijio, do you trust me?" She heard Di Fuyi's calm and authoritative voice. Gu Shijio was stunned by his question but answered without hesitation, "Yes. But listen to me and continue what you were doing." "But my stomach hurts from the practice. I'm afraid that our baby—" "Do not worry. Listen to me. What I want you to do now is going to protect our baby." Although Gu Shijio did not know why Di Fui was so nervous, she was also aware that something was not quite right within herself. Therefore, she took a deep breath and agreed, "All right." She closed her eyes, trying to ignore the sudden resistance in her brain, and continued to exercise her power. It was a glamorous setting with jade and corals scattered everywhere. Some pearls were bright like a light, swaying on the branches of the greenery in the area. The road was not paved in stone but a particular blue jade. It was shiny and lustrous, making the golden halo of the pearl reflect on the floor like a shining star. There was a peculiar palace in the middle, surrounded by clouds. By just looking at it, it felt like the palace was above all else, making people naturally want to worship it when they saw it. Chapter 2758. Did you fail this time? It seemed to be auspicious, but simultaneously also felt slightly murderous as a faint black gas was emitted at the top of the palace. At this moment, a person was sitting in the palace wearing a black robe. His eyes were beautiful like flowers, but his face was cold. There was a big cauldron in front of him, and there was a bright red liquid rolling around in the pot. From time to time, a faint black gas emerged from the liquid, and it seemed to be drawn into a black mirror in front of him. The mirror had a rather complex design that seemed to be triggered by the black gas that was drawn into it. Quietly, a woman fluttered into the palace and stood quietly behind him. The man in black seemed to be unresponsive to her presence. Perhaps he was unaware that she had entered the palace. Either that or he trusted the woman behind him, so he continued his practice involving the mirror. The woman's eyes fell on the mirror and shone slightly. She recognized the people inside the mirror. They were Gu Shijio, Di Fui, and their kid. The three of them looked like a very warm family, which made her envious. Her eyes then fell on the fingers of the man in black. It seemed that his fingertips also appeared to have turned black. Moreover, his face was pale, and his forehead was sweaty, which depicted that what he was doing consumed a lot of energy and effort from the man. Quietly, she bit her lips and continued to look into the mirror. She saw Gu Zijia's hand on a strange bloody flesh, and she seemed to be doing something to it as well. Meanwhile, her husband, Di Fui, hugged her in his arms. His palms were pressed on her back, which looked like he was helping her to exercise some power. Fan Qianshi frowned at the sight. At the same time, more black gas seemed to be churned out of the cauldron while the sweat on his forehead was oozing out more promptly too. It was obviously that the man was neutralizing what Di Fui and Gu Shijio were doing. Stop. Leave this bloody flesh. It will harm your baby. It will make you lose your baby. Gu Shijio, stop it. Fan Qianshi was threatening Gu Shijio every second. The message seemed to be communicated to her through the black gas that was entering the mirror. From her reactions seen in the mirror, Fan Qianshi could tell that Gu Shijio could hear him. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her lips were closed tightly. Instead of pulling away, she grew more and more certain of what she needed to do. The battle lasted for an hour, and by then, the woman next to Fan Qianshi noticed that the dragon's heart on the table had shrunk noticeably. The woman squinted her eyes in shock. It would appear that Gu Shijio had absorbed the energy from the piece of flesh. Boom! The copper cauldron in front of Fan Qianshi suddenly exploded. The mirror in front of him also instantly dissipated in the air. Right at that moment, a golden light that emerged from the air and hit Fan Qianshi. The man snorted, and his body trembled fiercely. He spat out a mouthful of blood by the sheer force that struck him. How can this happen? It should not have failed. They should not have been able to expel this ancient magic. What was that flesh on the table? Fan Qianshi was mumbling to himself as he was too stunned by the broken pieces of the copper cauldron and blood scattered on the floor. In a state of shock and disbelief, he talked to himself for some time while the woman behind him stayed silent like a shadow. Yen Air, can you tell me what was the piece of flesh on the table? The woman looked down at him and replied, it looked like a heart. Did you fail this time? Her tone was flat, indicating her nonchalance to his failure. Fan Qianshi's fingers clenched together tightly as he coldly said, this is a temporary failure. In any case, I must achieve my goal. My identity has already been exposed. Once he is back to his place, death would await us. The woman did not speak any further. Fan Qianshi took a deep breath and stood up. He muttered, "We must think of other ways to get them." His eyes fell on the woman, and he suddenly asked, "Yen Er, do you despise me?" The woman shook her head. "Yen Er belongs to you. No matter what you do, I have no regrets." Fan Qianshi was satisfied with her response and patted her shoulder. "It is ideal for you to think this way. By the way, I have made a new body for you to reincarnate in." Chapter 2759. How can you compare yourself to her? How is the body that you currently occupy? Fan Qianshi's hand fell on her wrist to check her pulse. The woman's body went slightly stiff. She looked down at her wrist and answered, "Thanks, master. Everything is well." Fan Qianshi looked at her for a moment and sighed. "You still hate me?" Wu Wuyan bit her lips. "I don't hate you. I am just confused." After she was reborn, she was like a piece of wood. Although she was very obedient, she seemed to have lost all emotions. Fan Qianshi tempted her several times, but she did not say a word. It was rare for her to ask questions, but Fan Qianshi wanted to know how she felt. "Ask me anything." "Master, you once said that Gu Shijio was your piece of work, like me. We are all your chess pieces. However, she has always betrayed you, yet you are still very polite to her. If you can treat me like her, who are you? How can you compare yourself to her?" Fan Qianshi's cold voice interrupted her midway through her sentence. Wu Wuyan was stunned and subsequently looked down. She calmly replied, "You're right. I have crossed a line. I am only your chess piece. I will remember my role from now on." Fan Qianshi looked at her and realized that he had gone overboard. He suspected that it was probably because of the failure he just experienced, which made his mood somewhat unstable. He sighed before continuing, "Yen Er, I did not mean that. What I wanted to say is that you and Gu Shijio have your own abilities and strengths. You don't have to compare yourself to her." "Yes, I will learn to accept this fact. Can I ask another question?" "Okay. Is Gu Zijia's soul different from mine?" I was surprised that she could become a great deity in such a short period of time. "Master, you have tried to control her several times, and even wiped away her memory, but always failed. From what I know, your technique of wiping one's memory has never failed before, except for Gu Shijio. Her soul is so powerful, so I naturally feel that the two of us are not alike." Fan Qianshi paused for a moment before he calmly said, "She is made by me using some special means. Thus, she is naturally much stronger. She is already out of your control. Why don't you make another soul that is as strong as her but more obedient?" Wu Wuyan blurted out. Fan Qianshi frowned. "She can't be copied, her soul is not." When he said that, he suddenly stopped and looked coldly at Wu Wuyan. "Yen Er, are you trying to test me?" Wu Wuyan bit her lips and bowed. "Master, you have overthought. I am just wondering. If you are worried, you can wipe away Almi memory in this aspect." Fan Qianshi stared at her for a moment, and finally he laughed. He then spoke in a soft and gentle voice, "Yen Er, you have been with me for so many years. You are always loyal, so I'm not worried about you. Alright, let's not discuss it anymore. What happened last time has caused you some injuries and unhappiness. I want to compensate you. Tell me, what do you want?" Wu Wuyan shook her head. "I don't need anything." Fan Qianshi looked at her and spoke slowly, "Yen Er, there is no need to hide anything from me. Do you like long sai?" Wu Wuyan suddenly looked up at Fan Qianshi. "Master, you don't have to hide it. I can understand if you like him because he used to be my clone. You liking him is the equivalent of you liking me. I will not blame you." Chapter 2760. Don't move. Wu Wuyan looked down at the ground, unable to summon the courage to look at Fan Qianshi. "Master, I admit that I have a special feeling toward him, but it is only because he is your clone. I have no other intention or motive." Fan Qianshi put his palm on her shoulder before continuing, "You don't have to be afraid. I don't blame you. The reason why I asked is that I really want to fulfill your wish. A woman deserves a good family. Don't worry, after I eliminate Di Fui, I will personally help you to put together the wedding. Wu Wian lowered her head and answered coldly, "Thank you, master." Fan Qianshi nodded. "Yen heir, as long as you are faithful, I will always care about you and make sure that you will have a good family. However, Long Sai doesn't have much feeling towards you yet. You still have to try to get close to him and earn his feelings the right way. After all, a twisted melon is not sweet." Wu Wian remained silent for a moment before responding, "All right. I will follow whatever you arrange for me." Then she looked at the debris on the floor and subconsciously wanted to clean up. However, Fan Qianshi waved his hand to stop her. "It's fine, you can go back first." Obediently, Wu Wian left Fan Qianshi alone in the hall. Fan Qianshi looked at the debris on the floor, and there was a trace of pain in his eyes. He lowered his body and cleaned the debris little by little, without using any spell. It seemed like he was cleaning the mess as a way to calm himself down. All of a sudden, he stumbled upon a big piece of debris on the ground. He picked it up and seemed to see a woman's face through all the dust. His fingers slowly gripped the article tightly, and it pierced into his palm, forcing blood down from his fingers. He closed his eyes slightly and looked down at the ground in dismay. Shijio, but I will make you regret the way you treated me." Inside the Biwu Palace, Gu Shijio was still startled by the dried piece of meat on the table. It was initially of a substantial size, but now, it was the size of a teacup. Also, it was no longer exuding any aura from it like before. She looked at her own hands again and wondered if she had absorbed the energy from the dragon's heart. "Shijio, how do you feel?" "Mother, how do you feel?" Di Fui and Di Hao asked their question at almost the same time. Subconsciously, Gu Shijio curled and stretched her fingers and toes. Then, she tried to run a bit of spiritual power through her body. "There is nothing wrong with me. In fact, I feel that my spiritual power has increased substantially." Di Fui pulled her over and said, "Let me see." He placed his palm on her lower abdomen. Gu Shijio was forced to sit on his knees so that he could assess her situation better. Di Fui took the opportunity to hug his wife from behind as Di Hao watched her with his big round eyes. He noticed that his mother's face had turned slightly reddish. She was rarely shy, but it seemed she felt uncomfortable with public displays of affection in front of Di Fui. She coughed a little to signal him to keep a distance. As expected, Di Fui merely tightened his grip on her. "Don't move." Gu Zijia's heart was pounding as she seemed to realize something. "Okay, I won't move." She looked at her son again as she was still quite embarrassed. "How heir, your father is diagnosing me." "I understand." Di Hao blinked his eyes and put a smile on his face. He knew that his mother was shy about what was happening. After a moment, Di Fui finally let go of her and breathed a sigh of relief. "Finally, it is successful. Hao heir, you did an excellent job this time." Di Hao trusted his father's medical advice. He replied, "I was truly lucky enough to find the flood dragon in time to get this over to help both of you." Di Fui raised his hand and rubbed his son's head. "I am fortunate to have such a good son." Gu Shijio silently listened to the males exchanging pleasantries and grew frustrated. She thought about what they had said for a moment and then tapped the table with a finger. Finally, she asked, "Can the two of you stop praising each other and explain to me what just happened?" Chapter 2761. Warmth. Since the evil energy in her body had been removed entirely, Di Fui did not want to hide the secret from her anymore. Thus, he explained the situation to her briefly. Gu Shijio was speechless. The evil energy in her body had disappeared, so her mind was now different from before. She was finally able to think clearly and rationally. When she thought of her own clingy attitude over the past few days, she felt even more embarrassed. She bit her lips and replied, "I didn't expect this mother-son Venom fetus to be so powerful. I merely touched Little Fox's wrist and was already infected with evil energy. It even attached itself to my baby. That's truly terrible." She looked at the Di Fui again and continued, "You must have been thinking of how to expel the evil energy from me over the last few days, right? No wonder you behaved a bit weird." Di Fui smiled slightly and explained, The evil energy is a form of spiritual power and could understand people's words. That was why I could not explain everything to you. Gu Shijio nodded in acknowledgement. I understand. She did not blame him. All of a sudden, she seemed to think of something. Before Hao Air came, you wanted to talk about our baby. Were you trying to persuade me to abort her? Di Fui remained silent. What was her intention of asking him this question? Shijio, it was the last resort. I really had no other way. Gu Shijio took a deep breath and exhaled. She could understand Di Fui's intention. Perhaps, if Di Hao had not shown up on time, she would have had to sacrifice the baby in her belly. Nonetheless, it really surprised her that Di Hao managed to find a solution even when Di Fui was already willing to opt for the last resort as his answer. How did Di Hao manage to figure it out? Furthermore, he managed to find just the right dragon at the right time. Everything seemed too perfect to be true. Hao Air, how did you know that this item can cure the mother-son venom fetus? Gu Shijio looked at her son, curiously. Di Hao was hesitated for a while before answering, Mother, I have my own ways. It is a heavenly secret, so I can't tell you. After Di Hao became the master of the heavenly law, he accidentally found the legacy left behind by Di Fui and learned about the cure through his work. It turned out that after Di Fui had no choice but to abort Di Shuyue, the matter had become a thorn in his heart. He was determined to find the solution to it and finally found a method. The method was to use the heart of an aquatic dragon just when it was about to ascend and become an immortal dragon. Of course, he had never tried it before, so Di Fui was only guessing that this method would work. When Di Hao grew up, he used to meet this aquatic dragon that had practiced to become an immortal creature. Di Hao once chatted with it and learned many secrets from it. As it was not easy to become an immortal dragon, this aquatic dragon was so proud to share its story and experience. When Di Hao asked it, it told him about how it practiced and even mentioned the exact date and location where it hid to ascend into an immortal dragon. Of course, it also said to him that its heart was very precious. The purification effect that it possessed was superior to the flesh of monk tang. It could improve one's spiritual power and also drive out any evil energy from their bodies. However, the condition was that it had to take out its heart voluntarily. If it were taken by force, the heart would have no effect at all. This dragon was good in nature, and it had a spirit like monk tang. It had been keeping a very low profile in the lower bound for 100,000 years. Thus, its life was very lonely, and it had no friends at all. But once it became a dragon, it was finally able to talk freely with people and wished to share about its family background to the people of the lower bound. While listening to its stories, Di Hao learned that it owed a favor to the former Emperor Immortal that it wanted to repay. It also asked Di Hao to help it find the descendants of the former Immortal Emperor and said that it could fulfill any request from the descendant of the former Immortal Emperor as long as it did not cost its own life. At the time, Di Hao never imagined that the information would be useful to him as he never expected to be able to travel back in time. Perhaps it was destiny, and God also thought that his parents should not have such an ending. Maybe that was why he was given a chance to fix things. Chapter 2762, Warmth, 2. Since it was a heavenly secret, Gu Shijio decided not to pry any further. She simply looked at the little Di Hao and then looked back at Di Fui. Her heart skipped a beat. When Di Hao was younger, she didn't pay much attention to his appearance. However, now that he was already a 3-year-old boy, his features were certainly similar to Shen Nianmo's. The two of them really looked like a family. Nonetheless, Gu Shijio also noticed that Di Hao's eyes and eyebrows were similar to hers. Whenever he smiled, his dimples on his cheeks were also very similar to hers. At that point, Gu Shijio was still unconvinced that Di Hao was their actual son. She had not had a baby before, and was sure that the one in her stomach was her first. To complicate matters further, Di Hao seemed to be able to anticipate many unforeseen events. And finally, she knew that she had a special feeling about the kid. In some ways, she felt as though the little boy was her actual son rather than an adopted one. Hence, she wondered if the boy was her son from the future that came back to the past. Gu Zijia's heartbeat raced from then onward. Without hesitation, She raised her hand and pulled Di Hao to her side. "How, you are from?" Before she could say the word future, Di Hao put his finger on her lips. "Mother, you don't have to know where I came from. Just know that I see two of you as my father and mother." His soft finger was cold, and his eyes were blinking at a higher frequency than usual, which obviously signaled her to stop asking any further questions. Fortunately, Gu Shijio was able to pick up the message. She smiled and replied, "Okay. We will treat you as our own son too." At the other end of things, Di Fui picked up a cup of tea and looked at the boy and his mother who were chatting and laughing. When the sun shone on them, it shimmered a little bit like golden glitter. It was such a picturesque moment that summed up his happiness. This scene might look very ordinary to a passerby, but for him, it was a hard-earned success. Naturally, he wanted this moment to last forever. He would not allow anyone to destroy it. His main cause for concern now was Fan Qianshi. Di Fui did not know where he was hiding and what he planned to do. However, if he were not removed from the equation, he still remained a significant threat to Di Fui. The man was the creator of the universe. Thus, his skills were out of this world. At this point, Di Fui might not even be considered a worthy opponent to him. It would be as though he was using eggs to destroy a rock. The only way he could challenge the man would be to become the master of the heavenly law. Di Fui had changed. The man looked at his fingers and wondered if he was still the appropriate master of the heavenly law. He used to take the initiative to attack all of his opponents. In the past, once he found the way to defeat an enemy, he would immediately execute it mercilessly. But now, he was a little bit hesitant. Although he had no memory of being the master of heavenly law, he instinctively felt that once he returned to the position, he would not be able to enjoy such a simple yet warm moment with his kids and beloved wife. Gu Shijio and Di Fui had gone through many hardships together, and they finally managed to catch a break. If possible, he wanted the present to last as long as possible. He took another look at Gu Shijio and sighed. Swiftly, he made up his mind that it was not the right time for him to make any bold movies. Since Gu Shijio was pregnant, it was not suitable for her to have frequent travels. He should think of their next move only after she gave birth to the baby. As for Fan Qianshi, he would face whatever problems came when the crisis arrived. Happy days always passed very quickly. 5 years had passed, and the starry crescent land had gradually turned prosperous again. Although it was not as prosperous as before, everything was certainly developing in the right direction. Gu Zijia's baby was born in the 2nd year of her pregnancy, and Di Fui personally helped her to deliver the baby. The little baby was very healthy. As for Di Hao, he spent most of his time in the Biwu Palace. He would leave every now and then to run a few errands, but after Di Shiyue was born, Di Hao stayed beside her all the time to take care of his sister. When Di Shiyue was born, she was not a genius like Shenyanma or Di Hao. Her primary spiritual power was somewhat low as well. Perhaps, this was because of the evil energy that was attached to her in the past. Chapter 2763, Warmth 3. When Di Fui and Di Hao were born, they were already immortals, and their spiritual power was above level 10. They could talk, run, jump, and even use their spiritual power to cast spells right after they were born. Meanwhile, Di Shiyue was an unusually small baby and had a lower spiritual power compared to her family members. On a spectrum, Di Zuyu's growth was more similar to that of a normal child. The only difference was that her progress was slightly faster. During her infancy, she was still weak and always needed people to carry her. But when she was 3 months old, she could sit on her own. When she was 5 months old, she could run. And when she was 6 months old, she started to talk. After she turned 1, Di Fui began to teach her some skills and spells. Unlike with Di Hao, Di Fui and Gu Shijio got to experience the entire process of raising a child. There were hardships and feelings of lethargy, but there was also a kind of warmth that could not be described. It was very fulfilling for Gu Shijio to watch the little baby grow up and learn new skills. As for Di Hao, he liked Di Shiyue very much. When Di Shiyue was still learning how to run, he often carried her around with him. After she could run, he often played together with her. Therefore, Di Shue always stayed around him like a mini shadow and loved addressing him as her brother. Needless to say, Di Hao enjoyed her presence and appreciated having a younger sister. At this moment, he was older than her. As for the future, that was still a mystery. Di Hao had tried to recall anything he could remember about his family, but strangely, he could not recall any recent memory about his family before he crossed over to the past. Perhaps the fate of his parents and sisters was unknown now, and they would have to rewalk this path that was recreated after so many things had changed. The future could be bright for them or dark. No one knew. He could no longer be the prophet now, so all he could do was to observe and take action step by step. Of course, he also felt that this kind of life was delightful. He could stay with his parents and enjoy their care. He could also be there to watch his cute sister, who should be older than him, grow up and refer to him as her big brother. Everything was good. Perhaps, the only thing that made Di Hao somewhat dumbstruck was the fact that he had turned into an adult when he was just 3 years old. However, after he traveled back to the past, it had been nearly 6 years, and he was still a child. He seemed to have only grown a little taller and looked like a 7 or 8 years old. It was no different from the growing speed of ordinary children. Was it because something had happened when he crossed over? Or was it because he was always envious of other children who could be spoiled by their parents, so God granted him the chance to spend more time with his parents? In fact, he should not complain about his physique. It did not matter to him that he was a child. What was more important was the spiritual power that he had accumulated over the years. He was now only at the level of a golden immortal. Hence, if he really encountered Fan Qianshi, his only strategy was to run away. As for Di Fui, he was swamped rebuilding the Starry Crescent land. The destruction of the wizardry barrier protecting the land required effort from him and the 4 messengers to restore. Furthermore, the people needed someone they could turn to in times of trouble. Hence, Di Fui had to appear to them as the Lord on several occasions to assure them that the future was bound to be bright. After all, Gu Shijio was focused on her 2 children. Since there was a perfect Lord available to help her, she was naturally happy to accept the assistance. In fact, she tried to return the position of the Lord to Di Fui several times, but Di Fui firmly rejected it. Therefore, Gu Shijio had to maintain her status as the Lord of the Starry Crescent land. However, Di Fui also told her that they would not stay there for too long. Once their children grew up and the situation in the Starry Crescent land became more stable, he would take them back to the upper bound. Chapter 2764. Father was a bad guy after all. The aura in the upper bound was significantly more vibrant than the aura in the lower bound. It was beneficial for them to cultivate up above. To return to the upper bound, they needed to travel through some peculiar place. It was okay for the 3 of them to do so, but not for Di Shue. She was too young and needed to be trained to level 9 before she can be brought to the upper bound with her parents. Of course, the Starry Crescent land could not be without its lord for long periods of time. So, they still had to come back once every 6 months until the next lord was appointed. According to the heavenly law, Gu Shijio needed to be the lord for 10,000 years before the next lord would appear. However, when Di Shue had turned 4, Di Fui noticed signs of a new lord through examining the starry array. The odd thing about it was that the new lord seemed to be currently outside of the Starry Crescent land. Despite his genuine attempt to figure out the identity of the individual, Di Fui's efforts were futile. Nonetheless, he was not worried. Since this star had already appeared, the other party would inevitably arise in 100 years or so and take over the position from Gu Shijio. By then, they could completely get rid of this burden. 100 years was not too long. They could afford to wait for it. Although Di Zuya's qualifications were not outstanding, she was also a brilliant child. She was like a sponge that absorbed knowledge very quickly. Her main disadvantage was that she was more timid and playful than they had envisioned. She was not serious in her cultivation and automatically retreated whenever she encountered difficult situations. She would even scream and cry whenever she saw a cockroach. And once she got scolded for being afraid, she would try to act like a cute little girl. If she were an average child, Di Fui would be somewhat impressed by her. He just wondered how she turned out to be so average and timid. Because of this characteristic of hers, Di Shuyue was often punished by Di Fui. The man had trained countless disciples, so he was experienced in teaching. When he was reincarnated as Shinyenma, he suffered under Shinjuli's guidance, so naturally he was a strict teacher. Of course, Di Fui and Shinjuli had very different characters, so their teaching methods were also different. In the past, Shinjuli treated Di Fui like a sheep. He often threw Di Fui into the wizardry barrier and let him explore it and grow on his own. Shinjuli was rigorous and has compiled a lot of secrets for his son to learn systematically. On the other hand, Di Fui preferred to train his daughter as opposed to dumping her into foreign lands to find her own way. For example, Di Shuyue was somewhat fearful of heights, so she did not want to practice the flying skills taught to her by Di Fui. Gu Shijio forced her several times, but she cried so hard while hugging her leg. She cried pitifully, asserting that she was still a baby and that people her age should be pampered instead of being forced into such difficult situations. Di Shuyue had a lovely face with big round eyes, long eyelashes and a small mouth. She was as cute as a Barbie doll. Therefore, it was difficult to stay mad at her when she cried. Even hard-hearted people would become soft-hearted. Getting this girl was not easy, so Gu Shijio still pampered her a lot. It was a bit unbearable to see her crying so hard. Thus, she did not force her to practice. However, after Di Fui knew about this, he just smiled at his daughter. "Shua, let father take you to the clouds to have a stroll." He casually spoke about the scenery in the clouds, which successfully evoked the kid's interest. Di Shuyue opened her small arms to let him carry her, so he took off with his daughter and went straight to the sky. While holding her safely in his arms, he used the opportunity to test her knowledge about the ability to fly. Chapter 2765. Father was a bad guy, too. Di Shuyue answered all his questions as she was very familiar with the theory of flying. She could respond well, so Di Fui was very satisfied. After that, he let her experience the scenery in the sky and raised his hand to make the clouds change into various shapes: elephants, birds, lions, and tigers. It could turn into anything that made her giggle very happily. While she was excitedly playing with the cloud-like animals, Di Fui asked her which animal she liked the most, and she pointed to the dapeng bird. Therefore, Di Fui patted her head. "Good girl, let's fly on it." All of a sudden, he threw Di Shuyue to the dapeng. However, this dapeng was made up of clouds, so naturally, it could not support Di Shuyue. Hence, Di Shuyue found herself falling like a cannonball from the sky. She was so scared and cried all the way down. She thought that her father would fly down to rescue her. It was completely beyond her expectations that the man would simply smile at her from above. "Good girl. You can do it. Fly." With that image in mind, Di Shuyue no longer wasted her time hoping that her father would rescue her. She did not want to crash into the ground and hurt herself. Desperately, she adjusted her body instinctively and used the flying technique that her mother had taught her. Alas, she landed on her buttocks. She was hurt and scared at the same time. Hence, she only continued crying. Her father finally flew down to her but kept himself above the ground. He patiently watched her cry and even invited her to do so more loudly, saying that it would give a better effect. This action made little Shuyue so angry. To get revenge, she decided to stop crying at once. She blamed the father for being biased because she did not see him train Di how like this before. The two of them even often discussed things together and went out to work together. Most of the time, little Shuyue could not understand their conversation, which made her feel somewhat jealous of being excluded. Di Fui did not interrupt her, and let her vent all her dissatisfaction. When she finally stopped, he asked, "Is that all?" Di Shuyue did not expect to hear these 3 words despite already complaining so much. Her father's nonchalance really stunned her. To continue to show that she was angry, she nodded and said, "Yes, that's all. Father, you are indeed biased. Mother used to say that men in this generation are always biased. I did not expect you to be the same." Di Fui pondered on what she had said and nodded. "After listening to you, I think I was indeed somewhat biased." Again, Di Shuyue was caught off guard by her father's response. She did not expect him to admit his mistake so easily. Feeling justified, she became even bolder. Then father, you should change. Di Fui rolled up his sleeves and pulled her into his arms. Well, I will try to change. He carried Di Shuyue and flew up again. Di Shuyue saw that her father admitted his mistake, so she generously said that if her father changed, he was a good father, and she would still love him very much. However, before she could finish speaking, her father had tossed her again. Since she already had an awful past experience, she could quickly pull herself together despite initially screaming at him. This time, she managed to land on her own. Father lied to her. Father was a bad guy. Di Shuyue did not cry anymore. She turned around and ran toward her mother. She did not want this deceiving father who liked to bully her. However, her short little legs could not outrun her father's sleeves. In just a brief moment, she was caught and pulled back up into the sky. Di Shuyue was crying in his arms all the way up and criticized the man for being dishonest. Chapter 2766. Father was a bad guy. 3. Di Fui smiled coldly. Why do you believe others so easily? Since you do, you deserve to be deceived. I am a trickster that enjoys deceiving others. Instead of letting you go out into the world and be deceived by others, it would be better for you to help me cure my addiction or at least quench my thirst in this aspect. And, today, no matter how much you cry, you have to practice the flying technique, or you can forget about going home. My favorite pastime is to spend my time with a crying child. When I see you cry, I have a sense of accomplishment. Di Shuyue was speechless. She finally realized that she could not escape. Her best option was to face her fear and practice. She also did not want her father to drop her from the sky again to force her to find her footing on the way down. Therefore, she chose to comply with him and practice flying. After trying again and again, she finally mastered the art of flying. She could now fly very fast yet steadily. Di Fui had spent the entire day with her and was pleased to see her making progress. Whenever he saw her practicing on her own, he rewarded her by giving her some fruits and toys. Nonetheless, Di Shuyue was rather stubborn and was not ready to forgive her father. She was still angry at him the entire time. Although she had been starving the whole day, she was too proud to accept his toys and fruits. As a result, her father put them away, patted her little head, and praised her for being tough. Instead of pampering her, he asked her to continue being tough. Di Shuyue was so angry that she could not help but shed a few tears. The little girl took the opportunity to threaten her father by telling him that she would go home and complain to her mother about the way he had been treating her. However, this place was thousands of miles away from home. With her current skills, she could not fly back, so naturally, her mother could not save her from this torture. Thus, her words were purely meant as an empty threat. As expected, her father was not afraid. He did not comfort her, and just let her continue crying. In typical fashion, he patted her head and told her to look for him when she was all cried out. He was going to take a dip in the ocean and catch some fish. If she cried long enough, he would cook some fish for her for dinner. Alas, Di Shuyue finally understood that crying was not going to get her out of the situation. Nonetheless, the misery was just overwhelming for her, so she continued to sob slightly longer on her own. Di Fui really left her to go fishing at the lake. He would let this girl cry until the place flooded if she wanted. All the crying only added to Di Zuyu's hunger. She was starving but could not win her father's sympathy and compassion. That drove her to feel angry and annoyed as well. After some time, she suddenly smelled the taste of grilled fish from a distance. That was the last straw for her. In the end, she just ran over to her father and grabbed one of the fishes that he was grilling without uttering a single word. Di Fui did not stop her, but he looked at her very interestingly. I thought you were adamant that you did not want anything from me? Why are you taking my fish? Di Zuyas simply took a mouthful of fish without entertaining her father. How much was her pride worth after all? How important was it for her to be tough? When she needed to be soft, she had to do so for her own benefit. Otherwise, she would be at a disadvantage. After spending almost the entire day together, Di Shiyue understood this theory and realized the malice that exists in the world. When the little girl returned, Gu Shijio realized that she was better behaved. She did not cry that frequently and had overcome her fear of heights. What surprised her from the beginning was that Di Shiyue had flown back home. Naturally, the little girl was exhausted. The moment she returned, she plunged herself into Gu Zijia's arms, asking for love and comfort. She even bit her lips and complained about the way her father had treated her. She wanted to cry, but she had cried too much over the past 2 days. Her tear glands were empty. To add to her misery, she saw her father smiling at her from a distance, so she chose not to cry anymore. Chapter 2767. Father was a bad guy, for she was so tired and exhausted that she even cried in her sleep and flailed her arms and legs around unconsciously. Although she had her own room, after she fell asleep, Di Fui came over and gently massaged her small arms and legs to soothe her muscles and eliminate her fatigue. When the massage was over, he got up from the bed and looked up to find Gu Shijio with folded arms leaning against the door frame and staring at him. He could tell from her eyes alone that she was smiling. The couple left their kid's room and returned to their bedroom. Gu Shijio looked at him and commented, "Shue hates you now. You should let her know that you gave her a massage." Di Fui shook his head. "She is too delicate. If she knew that I would be soft-hearted with her, it would be difficult to train her later on. Why are you so eager to keep pushing her? In fact, she is already doing well." Di Fui pulled her toward him and placed her on his lap. "Shijio, she is our child, so she is destined to experience more storms. I don't want her to suffer from losses in the future. The better she can get from her practice, the easier it will be for her to protect herself." Gu Shijio actually advocated strict education for children as she did not want her daughter to grow like a flower that required protection. Although Fan Qianshi had not reappeared yet, in Gu Zijia's heart, this was a knife hanging over her head. She did not know when the knife would fall, but once it did, there would surely be a bloody storm. She was not afraid for herself but was worried about the 2 children. Thinking about him made her hold Di Fui's waist and bury her head on his chest. However, what she uttered next was somewhat contradictory. "I feel that we will be able to keep her safe with our skills." Di Fui raised his hand and rubbed her hair. "Shijio, sooner or later, our kids will need to be independent. We can't protect her forever. She should be strong on her own. This child should have died, but she survived, so it was actually against destiny. Her future was bound to be more difficult. The sooner she became stronger, the less danger she would be in." Hence, what Di Fui said was reasonable, so Gu Shijio gave the task of training little Shiyue to Di Fui. The next morning when little Shiyue woke up, she thought that she could get a hug from her mother but ended up being dismayed as she was forced out of the residence sorrowfully by her father. She tried to ask her mother for help, but her mother did not help her this time. Instead, she waved her hand at her little girl and said, "Baby, you can do it. You are the best." Di Shiyue wanted to cry again. It seemed that her mother did not care about her anymore. As for her brother, Di Hao, who had always been very protective of his sister, he also smiled and waved his fist in the air to cheer her on. Apparently, no one was going to help her this time. She finally accepted her fate to be trained by her father, the smiling evil tiger. Gu Shijio watched the 2 of them leave and then looked at Di Hao, who was beside her. She held her son's little hand and wanted to go back into the house but soon realized that her son's little hand was ice cold as if it had just been pulled out from the snow. She frowned. "Why is your hand so cold? Are you unwell?" Instinctively, she raised her hand and touched his forehead but discerned that his temperature was normal. She was not at ease, so she checked his pulse but did not find anything wrong. Di Hao withdrew his hand and said casually, "I am all right. I just went to the top of the hill and had snowball fights with the muscle." Gu Shijio was less worried for a moment until she realized something abnormal about her child. It had been several years since Di Hao last grew taller. Although he looked like a 7 or 8 years old boy, which was his approximate age, Gu Shijio felt that something was not right. If his genes were as good as his father's, he should look like a teenager once he turned 3. Was his growth hindered by the fact that they were at the lower bound? Or was he being manipulated remotely by Fan Qianshi? Chapter 2768. In the dream she pondered over the possibility and looked at her son again. Di Hao was now at the level of a golden immortal, but somehow his progress seemed to have been halted. His abilities should have reached a higher milestone, but it seemed to be bound by something. Hao heir, come with me. She wanted to test her son's martial arts, so she took her to the practice arena. Coincidentally, Mu Feng and the three messengers were also practicing there. They had been really hardworking of late and had all turned into immortals after having experienced a catastrophe. Although they each had the opportunity to ascend to the upper bound, they were reluctant to leave their masters. Hence, they all stayed behind. The four messengers could imagine the lifestyle and culture in the upper bound from the way Gu Shijiao and Di Fui described it. If they were to choose to ascend in their current state, they would be considered very low-ranking immortals up there. Needless to say, that was also a deterring factor as they did not want to go up and get embarrassed. Therefore, they had been practicing very hard down here in hopes that one day they will be able to ascend with their masters and be in a better position. As Gu Shijiao and Di Hao approached the arena, Gu Shijiao told them that she was here to test his kung fu. This made Mu Feng and the rest very intrigued, so they wanted to observe the practice at the side. Di Hao was a bright kid. When he arrived at the arena, he already knew what his mother wanted to do. Nonetheless, he paused for a moment to think about the last time he was in a battle. After he retrieved the dragon's heart, he realized that his skills grew exceptionally slowly. Also, whenever he practiced, his entire body would ache severely as if some devil was possessing him. He thought to himself that it was perhaps his punishment for changing the course of events. He did not want his mother to worry, so he never said anything, but Di Fui had noticed everything over time. Over the past few days, Di Fui has been trying to regulate his bodily functions. The man had used all kinds of secret techniques, but the effect was not visible. Fortunately, because he looked young, the slow growth of his skills would not create any suspicion among the people around him. His father was the only one that noticed something unusual. As for Gu Shijiao, she knew too little about her son's abilities to be able to assess whether something had changed. Furthermore, since Di Shiyue was still very young, she had paid most of her attention to her daughter instead of her son. After all, Di Hao was not one to cling on to people. In fact, he spent more time with Di Fui than with Gu Shijiao. Therefore, she had not noticed her son's anomaly even though it had been present for a while. If she did not feel how cold his hand was from before, she would not have paid much attention to him. Di Hao looked at his mother, knowing that she was growing suspicious. If he did not fight with her, she would probably become anxious about his well-being. In trying to think of a plan, he paused and looked at her pitifully. "Mother, I am now at the bottleneck stage of my practice. My skills have declined a lot. Please show mercy to me." Gu Shijiao could not help but laugh. Rest assured. Of course, it was never her plan to hurt her son. With the exchange of pleasantries, the two of them started to fight. As expected, the fight was certainly exciting. Gu Shijiao learned that although her son's spiritual power was not too high, his tricks were extraordinarily fierce and potent. They could often exert a powerful effect with only minimal spiritual power. It could be said that this kind of skill would magnify his limited spiritual power to its most significant extent. Personally, Gu Shijiao had never seen those moves before. In fact, since she started off a little slower than she was capable, initially, the fight was not in her favor. Di Hao's swordsmanship was incredibly brilliant, and his moves were very sophisticated. By looking at the speed and angle of his moves, he was definitely a master. Without at least 100 years of practice, he would definitely not be able to reach this level. What was the actual age of her son before he crossed over? Gu Shijiao got distracted while pondering the possibilities and subconsciously defended her son's attack with too much force. As a result, the sword was thrown out of Di Hao's grasp. Chapter 2769. In the dream, too, Di Hao's palm was hurt and it bled. Meanwhile, Gu Shijiao deeply regretted her earlier distraction. She wanted to heal him quickly, however, Di Hao retreated before she could get close to him. "No, mother. It is just a minor injury. I will be all right. Oh yeah, I have not finished the homework father gave me earlier. I need to go now." Then he sneaked away without giving Gu Shijio a chance to stop him. The thought of him leaving did not really bother Gu Shijio. After all, this child was generally very tough. Nonetheless, Gu Shijio could not help but laugh at the thought of her daughter, who was on the opposite end of the spectrum. Her daughter was gentle like a princess. She would scream and cry at the slightest injury. Gu Shijio wondered whose genes she carried. Now she was taken away by Di Fui to be trained, she would undoubtedly suffer and cry a lot. Gu Shijio shook her head just thinking about it. Although she was somewhat distressed for her daughter, the lady was extremely sensible and could think rationally. She knew that her daughter would be all right. She remembered the time when she was trained by Di Fui too. Although he was very strict, he had so many tricks that made the training rather interesting. The process was a mix of happiness and pain. After all, Di Fui's abilities were simply unfathomable. Hence, there was no doubt that Gu Shijio had improved tremendously under his tutelage. While reflecting on the training she received from Di Fui, Gu Shijio recalled the tricks used by her son earlier. She definitely found his attacks to be very unique, and as a person who was crazy about martial arts, whenever she saw a new skill, she would like to study it. Her son's swordsmanship reminded her of the solitary sword that Ling Huchong practiced in the story Swordsman. In the story, Ling Huchong found himself injured to the point where he was not able to stand properly. However, with a sword in his hand, no one could even get close to him. He could kill people as easily as cutting vegetables. Gu Shijio somehow felt that Di Hao seemed to possess a similar trait. Given her unparalleled memory, Gu Shijio was generally good at remembering the moves of her opponents. However, she found Di Hao's moves to be rather complicated to recall precisely. Either that or there was a mysterious force attached to his fighting that prevented people from being able to remember his moves clearly. Nonetheless, Gu Shijio could still remember part of it, so she decided to practice those moves until the rest of it came back to her memory. Mu Feng and the three other messengers had a strange feeling about the fight. It was even worse for them as Di Hao's moves were like magic. They could not understand how he did each move and also could not remember what he did. Hence, they were very impressed when they saw Gu Shijio attempting to replicate it. Her dress fluttered in the wind, which made the scene look rather awe-inspiring. After an hour, Di Hao returned to the practice arena and saw that Gu Shijio was still there and practicing her swordsmanship. He was stunned and decided to pay attention to what she was doing. The more he watched, the more shocked he became. It seemed that his mother was able to almost replicate his every move in its entirety. What she lacked was practice. It was indeed remarkable that Gu Shijio actually remembered the steps that only the master of the heavenly law was supposed to know. Other than her, no one else knew how to practice the same way that the master of the heavenly law did. It would not be surprising to Di Hao if Di Fui could remember the moves as he had probably learned it before at some point in his life. However, Gu Shijio was only the lord of the Starry Crescent land. How did she manage to bypass the heavenly laws and achieve such a feat? Even though her moves still needed to be refined, Di Hao already found it amazing. Who was his mother? What was her original identity? How could she have this strange ability? Di Hao found himself in deep thought just watching her. Di Fui did not come back that night, so Di Hao carried a pillow and went into his mother's bedroom. "Mother, can I sleep with you tonight?" Gu Shijio felt guilty for not paying much attention to her kid lately, so naturally, she would not refuse. She patted her bed and invited him. "Come up." Chapter 2770. In the Dream, 3. As it was rare for Di Fui to be away, Gu Shijio took the opportunity to chat with her son under the quilt. She checked his little hand and found that his injured palm had healed entirely. There was not even a scar left behind. Finally, Gu Shijio was very relieved. She comfortably chatted along with her son and wanted to ask him more about the future. However, Di Hao looked very sleepy and even yawned a few times during their conversation. He looked a bit pale, so she could not bear to keep him up with any further questions. Di Hao rolled into her arms and said, "Mother, can you hug me to sleep? You have never put me to sleep before." The boy sounded rather pitiful, which made Gu Shijio feel bad as well. She had ignored her son too long. This son was rarely so clingy, so Gu Shijio did not want to reject him. She hugged him in her arms and replied, "Sure, I will hug you to sleep." Perhaps it was because she was hugging her son, but Gu Shijio actually fell asleep very soon after she hugged him. Her breathing grew heavier, and she lost consciousness. Meanwhile, Di Hao slowly opened his eyes while in her arms and quietly looked at her for a moment. Then he gradually extended his small hand to pinch a strange spell. There was a pale purple light at his fingertips all of a sudden, and he put his soft fingers on Gu Zijia's temple. Swiftly, the purple light glowed around her body and covered it entirely. Gu Shijio had a dream. The earth that she envisioned in her dream was strange and desolate, with hardly any life. There were many deep trenches on the ground that did not seem to exist naturally but looked as though a strong force created them. Seeing the barren land made Gu Shijio sad as many living things seemed to have perished. The sound on a thunderous battle could be heard somewhere in the distance in front of Gu Shijio. The sky was flashing with lights while the sound of thunder was raging through the air. The ground was shaking as if an earthquake with a magnitude of 10 occurred. The scarce, fragile vegetation that Gu Shijio saw had been uprooted, making the land even more desolate. She squinted her eyes to focus her vision and noticed that there was a group of people who were killing each other somewhere ahead of her. To be precise, 3 people were being chased by a group of orcs. These 3 people seemed to be a couple and a child, and the child was about 3 or 4 years old. When Gu Shijio arrived, the couple had been seriously injured and were dying. Nonetheless, the child seemed to be safe. There was only a split wound on the child's small arm, and it was not serious. Gu Shijio frowned as she magically retrieved a white sword in her palm. She attacked the group of orcs at once. She was skilled at wielding a sword, and her attacks could typically destroy an entire mountain. Hence, those orcs did not have any chance to fight back. After a few were killed, the leader shrieked and commanded the rest of his clan to run away. The couple survived. They struggled to get up to thank Gu Shijio as they could not even summon the strength to do so. The 2 of them seemed to be on the verge of dying, and Gu Shijio could not save them. The couple seemed to know this too. They only desperately stared at their child and said, "Please, please take care." He pointed his finger at the child when he died. The woman seemed to want to say something, but she was too weak to talk. Her eyes rolled upward. Then she went along with her husband. The child got out from under the woman's arms and looked at the dead couple. Then he looked back at Gu Shijio. He did not cry but just stood there awkwardly. Gu Shijio looked at the boy. He was a lovely boy and his talent was excellent. She immediately thought of taking him as her apprentice. She looked down at him and asked, "What's your name? Are you willing to recognize me as your teacher?" Chapter 2771. The Creator of the Universe. The kid was stunned and immediately raised his head. "I will not easily worship a master." Based on his reply, he seemed to be a rather proud individual. Perhaps having him as an apprentice was a gift. Gu Shijio raised her eyebrows slightly as she was surprised. She did not like to force people to do something they did not want to do. In fact, she was not looking for an apprentice. However, she was able to spot the child's talent, so she came up with the suggestion. Since the child seemed reluctant, she was too lazy to pursue the matter further. She nodded her head and sighed. "You are an ambitious boy. You don't have to recognize me as your master." She turned away and left. What was the world was like now? God, immortals, devils, beasts, humans, and perhaps even ghosts coexisted. They fought with each other and brought chaos to the entire world. Gu Shijio was determined to find out why all this had happened. She did not know why she lost a lot of her skills as well and was left with less than 20% of her spiritual power. Originally her skills were at the level of a great deity, but now she was just about the same as a lowly immortal. The child never thought that she would turn and leave. He was stunned for a moment as everything happened so swiftly. The child merely bit his lips but did not chase after her. He looked around and saw the different beings fighting against one another. The immortals did not like the demons, and in return, the demons wanted to get rid of the immortals too. The humans looked down on the ghosts, and the ghosts often harmed humans whenever they could. As for the orcs, they would side with whoever is beneficial to them. They would sell their loyalty to whoever was most powerful. They had bodies as hard as copper and bones as sturdy as iron. They had endless strength and power to move mountains and reclaim the sea. They were also the race that every ethnic wanted to kill. To conquer the world, these races fought crazily and developed a deep hatred for one another. Once they encountered each other, they would start to battle until the day ended or one party died. While Gu Shijio walked around to study the area, she had intercepted more than 10 battles. She was somehow tired from all these interventions and did not quite understand why the world had become so strange to her. Before she went to sleep, everything was fine. All ethnic groups could live together in peace. Now they were all segregated and against each other. Suddenly, something was stirring in front of her. Several figures seemed to be on their way to do something, but as soon as they saw Gu Shijio, who was squatting on the roadside, they stopped. Countless eyes fell on her. Gu Shijio frowned. These people were all big and round. Some of them had long horns on their heads, and others had scales on them. Although they were humanoids, they were obviously orcs at their core. Among them was a kid. That kid was the proud little guy that she had encountered before. At this moment, he was carried by a tiger-faced big man. Apparently, he was a prisoner. When the kid saw Gu Shijio, his eyes lit up slightly. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to call for help but decided not to say anything. A few of the fights that Gu Shijio encountered were related to the orcs, so she was having a headache when she saw them. Frankly, she did not like them very much. However, what even more disturbing to her was the fact that these orcs were only covered with a piece of animal skin on their body. When they were watching her, the thing at their crotch area had actually straightened up. The tiger-faced leader threw the kid into the hands of one of the other orcs and then rushed to her with slobber drooling down his face. Such a beautiful little fairy. Come with us. Gu Shijio was speechless. She unsheathed her sword at once. Chapter 2772, The Creator of the Universe, 2. Although her spiritual power was not as good as before, her ability to wield a sword still remained. Once her sword was in her grasp, she was invincible. The skills possessed by this group of orcs were much better than those that she had encountered before. Nonetheless, they were not her true opponents. After a short melee, 5 out of the 8 orcs were killed by her. Initially, Gu Shijio was compassionate and did not want to end their lives unnecessarily. However, they were too cumbersome to deal with after a while. They often used horny words to tease her in the fight and even used low-class tricks to attack her, such as attacking her chest. It was a disgrace to keep such creatures in the world. Therefore, she made up her mind to eliminate them all. The remaining 3 orcs realized that they were not able to challenge her, so they suddenly had an idea and used the kid as a hostage to force Gu Shijio to surrender. Gu Shijio glanced at the kid and asked, "Who's he? Why would I surrender myself because of him?" The leopard-faced orc, who was holding the kid, seemed to be a bit surprised. "You don't know him? He is the most wanted person in the 6 realms. Even your Emperor Immortal is desperately looking for him. We are bringing him to your celestial kingdom as a wager." "Why do they want him?" Gu Shijio glanced at the kid's face and wondered. "He is the most talented person in the world. No matter which faction gets him as their apprentice, it would be a great achievement. In the future, he might be able to unify the 6 realms." The leopard-faced orc then placed his sharp claws on the kid's neck. "The Emperor Immortal specifically ordered us to keep this kid alive. Whoever hurts him is an enemy of the whole celestial kingdom. How daring are you to go against the Emperor Immortal's will?" Gu Shijio folded her arms and replied, "Since hurting him makes one an enemy of the whole celestial kingdom, what are you doing now? Are you planning to tickle him?" The leopard-faced orc snorted. "Our orcs naturally do not have to follow the will of your emperor. Even if we kill this little guy, the Emperor Immortal will not dare to give us a difficult time. Gu Shijio looked at them casually and continued, "What is your request?" The three orcs felt that she finally felt threatened, so they all breathed a sigh of relief. They originally just wanted her to spare their lives. But now, they wanted more. They asked Gu Shijio to break one of her arms, and then kowtow 3 times to them. Gu Shijio chuckled. "I originally thought that this kid was useful enough to spare your lives. However, you missed the opportunity to save yourself. Such a waste." In an instant, Gu Shijio seemed to disappear in front of their eyes in a flash. The 3 male orcs had not seen her reappear yet before they saw 1,000 stars in front of their eyes. All 3 of them fell to the ground. The leopard-faced orc still had some sense left in him. Before he died, he used his sharp nails to scratch the kid. The orc's nails were obviously poisonous, so the kid's face instantly turned blue. After Gu Shijio settled the orcs, she pulled the kid over and treated his wound for him. After her fingers touched his wound, the poison was automatically dissolved. The kid seemed to still hold a grudge against Gu Shijio for abandoning him earlier. He bit his lips and proudly said, "Now that you know who I am, even if you heal for me, I will not necessarily worship you as my master." Unless, Gu Shijio did not need to hear the rest, so she said, "I do not plan to take you as my apprentice anyway." The kid was stunned and opened his mouth slightly. He could not believe her. "Liar, are you trying to fool me?" Was this kid so proud of himself? Nonetheless, since everyone in the 6 realms was fighting for him, perhaps he had the right to think of himself that way. Chapter 2773, The Creator of the Universe, 3. Gu Shijio genuinely did not want to accept the boy as her apprentice. After all, this kid was obviously stubborn and not easy to be trained. To avoid wasting any more time, Gu Shijio patted his shoulder, turned, and left. The kid was stunned for a moment and finally realized that the other party really did not want to accept him as an apprentice. He thought about what had happened for a while and decided to catch up with Gu Shijio. He stopped right in front of her and said, "Since you have saved me twice, I can tell you my name." "There is no need. I'm not interested." The kid's face turned green. It was probably his first time being rejected so many times by the same person. He raised his voice as Gu Shijio continued to walk away. "Since I said that I want to tell you, I must keep my promise. I am Chenshur." "That's a nice name. Good for you." Gu Shijio patted his head, turned, and left. The boy really could not believe that Gu Shijio had no interest in him at all. He watched her back as she walked away and stamped his foot on the ground. "Hey, little fairy, what is your name? When I get stronger in the future and dominate the 6 realms, I will repay you for what you have done today and promote you." This kid spoke like he was giving her the greatest gift in the future. He made it sound like it was only a matter of time for him to be the ruler of the 6 realms. It was likely that the kid's ego had been inflated after being pursued by everyone to be his apprentice. Frankly, he was an excellent seed to sow and nurture, but he was simply too arrogant. If he continued to behave this way, the end result would be bad. After listening to his last sentence, Gu Shijio stopped abruptly. The idea of accepting him as her apprentice lingered again in her mind. She thought that since he was the creator of the universe, it was her responsibility to direct this kid in the right way since he might affect the future of the 6 realms. Slowly, she turned around and asked, "Chenshur, I will ask you once again, do you want to worship me as your master?" Having heard that question, the child immediately turned arrogant again. He raised his chin highly, thinking to himself that the lady had just been pretending to walk away. "Little fairy, although your kung fu is very high, you are not qualified to be my master. I will only consider it if you are willing to listen to me and follow my commands. You have to know that if you take me as your apprentice, I can help to promote you to the highest position in the Celestial Kingdom. Even the Emperor Immortal will look up to you." He stopped before he finished his sentence because Gu Shijio raised her hand and touched his head. "Chenshur, you are in dire need of medication. I have given you a chance, it's fine if you don't want to take it." She no longer cared about him and directly teleported away. The kid was speechless. He could sense that he had missed an excellent opportunity. He couldn't help but shout, "Who are you?" No one answered him. He clenched his fists in disappointment and said to himself, "I will go to the celestial kingdom and worship the most powerful immortal as my teacher. Little fairy, I will make you kneel at my feet." The 6 realms were in a state of chaos. It was so bad to the point where it was suffocating. It was impossible for Gu Shijio to use her current strength to restore the world to its previous condition. Everything had to wait until she could restore her abilities. Therefore, Gu Shijio isolated herself in a valley so that she could cultivate and restore her spiritual power as quickly as possible. Because of the continuous war in the 6 realms, all the lands were damaged by natural disasters such as hurricanes as well as fierce battles. It was also the same in the valley in which Gu Shijio had isolated herself. The once lush forest was now destroyed by war, and the minimal vegetation on was now even more scarce. Flowers became a rare species. Nonetheless, after staying here for some time, Gu Shijio seemed to have rekindled her own purifying aura. She had automatically purified the suffocated air swirling in the valley to the point where a clear sky was revealed on top of her. Wherever she went, steam seemed to travel with her around her body that moistened everything to the point where the bare mountains began to sprout again with vegetation. There was colorful, auspicious air rising out of the valley. Chapter 2774. The Creator of the Universe. 4. The greenery began to spread farther and farther. In the end, the land within 1,000 miles from where she was standing began to regain its vitality. Di Hao looked at his mother, who was asleep, and his fingers that were covered in light shivered slightly. He looked shocked. He used a special technique that enabled him to find out the origin of a person by tracing their ancestry. Now, he finally found out the origin of his mother. She was the creator of the universe. Although he could only see pictures from her dream, he could already tell her identity was he saw the bright, auspicious aura that breathed life into the area. He was sure of her identity. The creator of the universe could bring vitality to everything. Therefore, there would be flowers and plants present wherever she went. Di Hao had become aware of this knowledge when he became the master of the heavenly law. He was wondering at the time how would such a person like Fan Qianshi could be the creator of the universe. Apparently, he had self-proclaimed himself to be the creator of the universe or had taken over the position from the original candidate. There was only one way for the latter to occur, which was that the original creator of the universe had immortalized. Di Hao took a light breath and continued to think about this matter. Even his father, as the former master of heavenly law, did not know about this because he always believed that Fan Qianshi was the creator of the universe and often played chess with him. Why did his mother immortalize? How could she become a clone? Furthermore, since the kid in her dream was undoubtedly Fan Qianshi, did he ever worship the original creator of the universe as his master? How did he become her successor? Numerous questions were spinning around in Di Hao's mind. He decided to cast another spell to continue watching everything unfold. He saw that Gu Shijio set up a wizardry barrier in the valley and practiced very hard. There was once when she finally made a breakthrough in her practice, but she could not muzzle the auspicious aura that came from her body. It was so strong to the point where the auspicious aura broke through her wizardry barrier and rose to the sky. This was a sensitive matter to the celestial kingdom. When someone saw it, they quickly reported it to the Emperor Immortal. At that time, Emperor Immortal was delighted by the arrival of Qianshi. He held a grand banquet in the celestial kingdom to welcome the little boy. He wanted to find a good master for Qianshi to nurture his talents so that one day he would be able to bring glory to the celestial kingdom. As expected, Qianshi had extremely high requirements. He only wanted to worship the strongest person in the celestial kingdom. To be sure that the selected person was the strongest, he wanted them to battle each other and prove the status. Therefore, the banquet turned out to be a contest in which all the masters in the celestial kingdom found themselves on a battle platform. But in the midst of the matches, there was a spy who came to report the auspicious aura seen in the sky. This matter was very significant, so the Emperor Immortal immediately followed the spy to observe the auspicious aura. After seeing its shape and form, his facial expression changed slightly. He seemed to be happy and somewhat stunned as well. This is the work of the creator of the universe. Is the creator awakened? The other immortals looked at each other for an explanation. Some of them could not help but ask, is there a creator of the universe? I always thought it was all a myth. Yeah, I haven't seen him in the past 10,000 years. It turns out that he was not immortalized yet. Was he just asleep this whole time? Most of the immortals made their speculations. However, Qianshi, who had been quiet the whole time, suddenly shouted, I want to worship the creator of the universe as my teacher. Then he turned around and rushed down to the scene. The immortals looked at each other and were confused as to what to do next. Meanwhile, the Emperor Immortal said in a serious tone, the creator of the universe is awakening. It is a blessing to the 6 realms. I shall go and visit. He led the crowd together to the lower bound. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.